Dr. Victor Marshall stands in handcuffs at the front desk of the Westlake Police Department, blood trickling from his split lip, his tailored suit torn at the shoulder. 3 white officers surround him, smirking. "Wait until the chief hears about you impersonating a police official," one sneers. The station falls silent as a voice from behind asks, "Would someone explain why you have my credentials in your hand?" The officers turn, confusion spreading across their faces. Before we dive into this shocking story of justice and prejudice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If this moment of reckoning has captured your attention, hit that like button and subscribe to follow more stories of truth being revealed in the most unexpected places. Now let's rewind to see how this accomplished man ended up in handcuffs in the very department he was hired to lead. Dr. Victor Marshall checked his watch as the early morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of his temporary apartment in Westlake. It was 5:30 a.m., 2 hours before his official introduction as the new chief of police. At 52 years old, with salt and pepper hair cropped close to his scalp, and a physique maintained through disciplined morning runs, Victor carried himself with the confidence of a man who had spent 25 years building an impeccable career at the FBI as a behavioral analyst. Today marked a new chapter, one that he had carefully considered before accepting. Westlake was a mid-sized city, with troubling statistics that had caught the attention of the Department of Justice 3 times in the past decade for racial profiling and excessive force complaints. The previous chief had retired amid a scandal involving covered-up misconduct, and Mayor Patricia Reynolds had personally recruited Victor with the mandate to transform the department from the inside out. Victor had made a deliberate decision to arrive early and in civilian clothes this morning, a calculated move to observe the department's culture without the filter that would inevitably come once officers knew his position. As he adjusted his navy blue tie in the mirror, his phone rang. It was Serena, his wife of 27 years, calling from their home in Atlanta, where she would remain until the end of the month to finish her work as a pediatric surgeon before joining him. "Today's the day," she said, her voice a mixture of pride and concern. "Remember why you're doing this, Victor." He did remember every single day. 15 years ago, his younger brother, Michael, had died in police custody after being arrested for matching the description of a robbery suspect. The officers involved had faced no consequences, and that injustice had redirected Victor's career toward reform and accountability. After saying goodbye to Serena and receiving a good luck text from his college-age daughter Zoe, Victor drove through Westlake, taking mental notes about the stark contrast between the city's diverse population and the all-white officers he observed patrolling the streets. The police station loomed ahead, a 70s-era brick building with American flags flanking the entrance. Through the windows, he caught glimpses of officers' desks, some displaying subtle but unmistakable Confederate memorabilia, despite department regulations against such displays. Victor parked his car in the public lot, rather than the reserved space that would be his starting today. He entered through the main doors, joining the small group of civilians in the lobby. For 20 minutes he observed the interactions at the front desk, noting how the white receptionist's demeanor shifted noticeably when addressing black citizens versus white ones. The former received curt, suspicious responses, while the latter were greeted with smiles and helpful information. Victor mentally cataloged these interactions as baseline data for the cultural transformation ahead. When the lobby cleared, he approached the front desk, dressed in his tailored charcoal suit that had been custom-made in Atlanta. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s named Barbara, according to her nameplate, immediately tensed as he approached. Her hand moved slightly closer to the panic button beneath the desk, a subtle movement that Victor's trained eye didn't miss. "Good morning," Victor said with a professional smile. "I have an appointment with Interim Chief Wagner this morning." Barbara's eyes narrowed slightly. "Your name?" she asked, not returning his smile. "Victor Marshall," he replied, deliberately omitting his title. "I don't see any appointment with a marshal," she said after a performative glance at her computer screen. Victor noticed she hadn't actually typed his name into the system. "Perhaps you could call the chief's office, I believe. Mayor Reynolds may have arranged it directly." At the mention of the mayor, Barbara's expression soured further. As she reluctantly reached for her phone, Victor noticed two white detectives watching him from across the lobby, their postures shifting from casual to alert. The older one whispered something to the younger, and they began moving toward the front desk. Victor recognized the look in their eyes. It was one he had documented countless times in his research on law enforcement bias. His first test of Westlake's police culture was about to begin much sooner than he had anticipated. Detective James Sullivan had spent 20 years building his reputation in the Westlake Police Department, climbing from patrol officer to detective through a combination of high arrest numbers and unwavering loyalty to fellow officers. At 48, with a receding hairline and the beginning of a beer gut stretching his department polo shirt, Sullivan considered himself the backbone of real policing, in a world gone soft with sensitivity training and civilian oversight. Boards. When the news broke that the mayor had passed him over for the chief position in favor of an outsider, the betrayal had burned like acid, especially when rumors circulated that the new chief was a black federal agent with reform ideas. Now, watching the well-dressed black man at the front desk, speaking to Barbara Sullivan, nudged his partner, Detective Robert Conley. "Look at this guy," he muttered, "acting like he belongs here." Conley, a former college linebacker who had followed Sullivan's lead for 7 years, as his partner straightened his shoulders, been hanging around for at least 5 minutes. Barbara looks uncomfortable. Sullivan observed the man's expensive suit and confident posture, which only irritated him further. In Sullivan's 20 years, he had developed what he called a sixth sense for people who didn't belong, though this sense seemed exclusively activated by minorities in predominantly white spaces. The two detectives approached just as Barbara was reluctantly reaching for her phone. "Everything okay here, Barb?" Sullivan asked, positioning himself directly behind the visitor, intentionally violating normal personal space boundaries. Victor turned calmly, maintaining his professional demeanor, despite immediately reading the hostility in Sullivan's stance. "Good morning, officers," he said evenly. "Just checking in for my appointment." Sullivan didn't return the greeting. "ID," he demanded flatly, hand extended. Victor raised an eyebrow, noting the lack of any introduction or explanation for the demand. "May I ask why that's necessary?" "I'm here for a scheduled meeting." Sullivan's jaw tightened. "This is a police station, not a coffee shop. Everyone needs to identify themselves." Officer Melissa Chen, a 26-year-old Asian-American officer who had been with the department for 3 years, approached the growing situation, her instincts telling her something wasn't right about how the detectives were handling this visitor. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, looking between Sullivan and the well-dressed man. Sullivan shot her an annoyed glance. "Just handling a potential security issue, Chen." "We've got it." Victor, still observing the dynamics unfolding, decided to provide his identification while continuing to assess the officer's behavior. He reached for his wallet and produced his driver's license. "I'm Dr. Victor Marshall. As I mentioned, I have an appointment this morning." Sullivan scrutinized the license with exaggerated suspicion, then looked up with narrowed eyes. "Says, here you're from Atlanta. What's your business in Westlake?" Before Victor could answer, Sullivan's eyes widened with feigned recognition. "Wait a minute. There was a bulletin about someone impersonating law enforcement officials in the Tri-County area. You wouldn't happen to be claiming you're here on police business, would you?" Victor remained composed, recognizing the deliberate escalation tactic. "I'm here to meet with Interim Chief Wagner, as arranged by Mayor Reynolds." Sullivan exchanged glances with Conley, a silent communication that Victor immediately recognized as trouble. "That's so." Sullivan handed the license to Conley, while maintaining eye contact with Victor. "Because Chief Wagner didn't mention any appointments with out-of-towners, especially not with someone claiming to be." Sullivan paused, his implication hanging heavily in the air. Victor decided it was time to reveal his credentials. He reached inside his jacket, causing Sullivan to immediately place his hand on his weapon. Slowly, Sullivan barked. Victor paused, then very deliberately removed his official credentials, identifying him as the incoming chief of police. "Perhaps this will clarify matters," he said, his voice steady. Sullivan took the credentials, examining them with obvious skepticism. "These look fake," he declared, without any actual examination of the security features. Where would someone like you get credentials like these anyway? These positions require qualifications that, too, he trailed off. But the implication was clear. Officer Chen peered at the credentials from beside Sullivan, her eyes widening slightly in recognition of their authenticity, but Sullivan quickly folded them closed. Victor maintained his composure while noting every word and microaggression. "Detective, I suggest you contact Mayor Reynolds or Interim Chief Wagner to verify my identity. This situation is becoming unnecessarily complicated." Sullivan's face hardened at what he perceived as a challenge to his authority. "We'll sort this out downtown. Until then, you're being detained for questioning regarding impersonation of a police official." Victor reached for his phone. "I'll just call the mayor myself then." Sullivan interpreted the movement as a threat, grabbing Victor's wrist with excessive force. "He's reaching." This manufactured excuse was all Conley needed to help Sullivan force Victor against the front desk, wrenching his arm behind his back with unnecessary force. Officer Chen stepped forward. "Detectives, I don't think this island." Sullivan cut her off with a sharp glance. "Back off, Chen. This is detective business." As Sullivan roughly handcuffed Victor, applying the restraints tight enough to dig into his wrists, Conley made a show of checking the floor around them. "Well, well," he said, bending down to pick up a small plastic bag containing white powder that had mysteriously appeared near Victor's foot. "Look what we have here." Victor, despite the pain in his shoulders from the awkward position, caught the sleight of hand that planted the evidence. "That's not mine, and you know it," he stated calmly, loud enough for others in the lobby to hear. "You're making a very serious mistake." Sullivan leaned in close, his voice low but filled with venom. "No, you made the mistake thinking you could walk in here pretending to be someone important. This is my department, and we have ways of dealing with people who don't know their place." Victor remained silent, calculating his response, as several other officers and civilian staff gathered to watch the commotion. The public humiliation was clearly part of Sullivan's intended message. Officer Chen attempted once more to intervene. Detective Sullivan, his credentials, looked official. "Maybe we should call the mayor's office before." Sullivan turned on her with barely contained rage. "You're one step away from insubordination, Chen. Get back to your post, now." As Chen reluctantly backed away, Sullivan turned to the growing audience of officers. "This suspect was caught impersonating a police official and is in possession of narcotics. Booking will process him while we investigate his false claims." He roughly led Victor toward the processing area, ensuring the entire bullpen could witness the black man in handcuffs being led through their domain. Victor walked with his head high, making deliberate eye contact with several officers, memorizing faces and reactions that would become very relevant very soon. "You have the right to remain silent," Sullivan recited with theatrical emphasis. "Though in your case, I don't think anyone's going to be listening anyway." The processing area of Westlake Police Department hummed with fluorescent lighting and the occasional burst of radio chatter as Victor Marshall was photographed, fingerprinted, and catalogued like any common criminal. Detective Sullivan stood nearby, a smirk playing on his lips, as the booking officer, Sergeant Frank Miller, a balding veteran with 30 years on the force, processed the paperwork. Impersonating a police officer, trespassing, and possession of a controlled substance, Sullivan listed his voice, carrying intentionally to the other officers nearby. "Make sure it's all documented properly, Frank." As Miller inputted the information, Victor noted the sergeant's momentary hesitation when reviewing the evidence log. "The substance hasn't been tested yet," Jim Miller said quietly. "And these credentials look authentic to me." Sullivan leaned in, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper that Victor could still hear clearly. "Just process him, Frank. Trust me, this guy is trouble. We've handled worse before, remember." The veiled reference to some previous incident caused Miller to glance away, then nod reluctantly as he continued the booking process. When Miller turned to take Victor's fingerprints, Sullivan leaned close to Victor's ear. "You people always think you're so smart, don't you?" he whispered. "Coming in here with your fancy suit and fake credentials. I've seen your type before, thinking you can play dress-up and fool everybody." Victor remained silent, memorizing every word, while allowing Sullivan to reveal more of his prejudice. The detective continued, emboldened by Victor's silence. I don't care what affirmative action certificate you got from some community college, there's no way they'd make someone like you chief in my department. After fingerprinting, Victor was escorted to a small interrogation room with dingy beige walls and a metal table bolted to the floor. Sullivan and Conley entered a few minutes later, deliberately making Victor wait in handcuffs. Officer Chen appeared briefly at the door with a file, but Sullivan waved her away. "Turn off your body cam, Chen. We've got this covered." Victor noticed Chen's hesitation before she nodded and left, but not before making brief eye contact with him. In that moment, Victor suspected she might be recording despite Sullivan's order. Once alone with Victor, Sullivan and Conley began their intimidation routine, with Sullivan circling the table while Conley stood menacingly in the corner. "So Dr. Marshall Sullivan," said, mockingly emphasizing the title. "Quite a story you've concocted. Let's hear about these impressive qualifications that supposedly make you our new chief." Victor studied both men, applying his years of behavioral analysis training. Sullivan displayed classic authoritarian personality traits with severe racial bias, likely stemming from deep insecurity about his own capabilities. Conley was a follower seeking approval from the alpha figure with less personal initiative but willing to participate in misconduct to maintain his standing. Victor chose his words carefully. "I've served 25 years with the FBI as a behavioral analyst specializing in law enforcement practices and reform. Before that, I earned my doctorate in criminal psychology from Georgetown and served as a consultant to multiple police departments, implementing community-oriented policing strategies." Sullivan scoffed. "Convenient claims when there's no one here to verify them. Tell me, in this fantasy world, where you're qualified to lead real police officers, what would your first move be?" Victor maintained steady eye contact. Proper evidence handling protocols would be a priority. For instance, documenting exactly when and where evidence was discovered with witnesses present to confirm chain of custody. The subtle reference to the planted drugs caused Conley to shift uncomfortably. Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Meanwhile, across the station, Interim Chief Douglas Wagner, a 30-year veteran nearing retirement, returned from a budget meeting with the city council. The 59-year-old Wagner, with silver hair and reading glasses perpetually perched on his nose, noticed unusual activity around the booking area. "What's going on?" he asked an officer nearby. "Some guy claiming to be a police official," the officer replied vaguely. "Sullivan and Conley are handling it." Wagner frowned, checking his watch. "The new chief is supposed to arrive today. Has there been any word from the mayor's office?" Before the officer could respond, Administrative Assistant Denise Washington, a black woman in her 40s, who had worked at the department for 15 years, despite facing constant microaggressions, approached Wagner with concern in her eyes. "Chief Wagner, there's something you should know," she began, her voice low. "I recognize the name of the man they just arrested. It matches the memo about the new police chief appointment." Wagner's eyes widened as Denise continued. "I've already called the mayor's office. They're on their way." Back in the interrogation room, Sullivan was growing increasingly frustrated with Victor's calm demeanor and precise responses that revealed his deep knowledge of police procedure. "Let's cut the act," Sullivan snapped. "Who put you up to this? Is this some kind of test from those civilian oversight crusaders?" Victor tilted his head slightly. "You seem quite concerned about oversight, Detective Sullivan. Has that been an issue for you in the past?" Sullivan slammed his hand on the table. "You don't ask the questions here. 20 years I've protected this city, and I'm not about to let some affirmative action hire waltz in and tell real police officers how to do their jobs." The outburst revealed more than Sullivan intended, and Victor filed away the detective's revealing comment for future reference. In approximately 1 hour, Mayor Reynolds would arrive for his formal introduction ceremony, and Victor calculated exactly how much more information he could gather about the department's toxic culture before the situation. Resolved. What would you do if you were in Dr. Marshall's position right now, facing such blatant discrimination and abuse of power? Comment number 1, if you would immediately reveal your true identity, or number 2, if you would remain silent to gather more evidence about the department's culture. Like this video if you believe police departments need better accountability systems, and subscribe for more stories about justice prevailing against all odds. Now let's see how this situation ripples through the entire police department as more people begin to realize what's happening to their new chief. Word of the well-dressed black man's arrest spread through the department like wildfire, creating visible fault lines among the staff as officers and civilian employees reacted according to their own biases and sense of justice. Officer Melissa Chen stood in the break room, her coffee untouched, as she whispered urgently to Officer Jamal Williams, one of the department's few black officers. "Something's not right about this arrest," she insisted, keeping her voice low. The credentials looked completely legitimate, and Sullivan practically snatched them out of my view when I tried to verify them. Williams sighed, a weight of resignation in his expression that came from years of witnessing similar scenarios. "You know how Sullivan operates, Chen. Remember last month when he detained that black pediatrician for suspicious behavior, when the man was just waiting for his wife outside the restaurant? Across the bullpen, a group of officers loyal to Sullivan gathered around. Detective Brad Thompson, a vocal supporter of the department's aggressive tactics. "Sullivan's just doing his job," Thompson declared. "If some guy shows up claiming to be brass, you better believe we should verify that. For all we know, he could be casing the place." Officer Rodriguez, a Latino veteran with 15 years on the force, kept his head down at his desk, typing reports but clearly listening to both conversations. He had survived in the department by avoiding confrontation, but Chen noticed his typing had stopped as he strained to hear the discussions. The station had physically divided into factions, revealing deeper systemic issues that normally remained below the surface. At City Hall, 6 blocks away, Mayor Patricia Reynolds was reviewing budget proposals when her phone rang. The 50-year-old mayor, a former prosecutor with silver-streaked black hair, always perfectly styled, had staked her re-election campaign on police reform after several high-profile misconduct cases had cost the city millions in settlements. "Mayor Reynolds," she answered crisply. The color drained from her face as Denise Washington explained the situation at the police station. "He's been what?" the mayor exclaimed, standing so abruptly that her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Call Wagner immediately." She hung up and turned to her chief of staff. "Greg, the police have arrested our new police chief." Greg's jaw dropped. "The same chief you recruited specifically to address racial bias in the department." Reynolds grabbed her blazer from the coat rack. "The very same. Call the city attorney and have her meet us at the station." She shook her head in disbelief. This is either the worst coincidence in municipal history or exactly why we needed him in the first place. The mayor repeatedly dialed Victor's cell phone as her driver sped toward the police station, each unanswered ring increasing her anxiety. When she finally reached Interim Chief Wagner, the man sounded genuinely shocked. "Arrested? On what charges?" Wagner asked, clearly hearing this news for the first time. "I've been in budget meetings all morning. Let me look into this immediately." Wagner hung up and marched directly to the detective division, finding Sullivan reviewing paperwork with Conley. "Detective Sullivan," Wagner said sharply. "I understand you've arrested someone claiming to be our new chief." Sullivan straightened defensively. "Chief Wagner, this guy walked in with obviously fake credentials. Plus we found drugs on him. Classic impersonation case." Wagner's eyes narrowed. "Did you verify the credentials with the mayor's office before making the arrest?" Sullivan's expression hardened. "With all due respect, sir, when someone comes in off the street claiming to be our new boss, it's my job to verify their story." He was evasive and uncooperative. Wagner noted Sullivan's careful framing, recognizing the detective's skill at justifying questionable actions. "Where is he now?" Sullivan gestured toward the interrogation rooms. "Being processed." "Don't worry, we're handling it by the book." The subtle emphasis on "we" communicated the tribal expectation that Wagner would back his officers regardless of circumstances. Meanwhile, in the holding area where Victor had been moved after initial questioning, he found himself among several other detainees, all minorities with similar stories of harassment or planted evidence. "They got you too, huh?" asked a young black man named Marcus Jones, arrested for suspicious behavior while waiting for a bus. "What's your story?" Victor introduced himself simply, as Victor deliberately omitting his title as he built rapport with the other detainees gathering their experiences as evidence for future reforms. "Just a misunderstanding," Victor replied calmly. Jones studied him curiously. "You don't seem too worried for a guy in handcuffs." Victor smiled slightly. "Let's just say I believe in the system's ability to correct itself when properly motivated." Jones snorted. "Man, you must be new to Westlake. This department's been crooked since I was a kid." As they continued talking, Jones suddenly straightened, recognition dawning on his face. "Wait a minute. I saw your picture in the newspaper, aren't you?" Victor subtly shook his head, and Jones, reading the signal, simply nodded and changed the subject. Officer Chen, meanwhile, had made a decision. She approached Chief Wagner's office, knocking tentatively before entering. "Sir, I need to show you something," she said, closing the door behind her. She removed her body camera and connected it to Wagner's computer. "I was ordered to turn this off during the arrest, but—" She hesitated, the weight of breaking the unwritten code heavy on her shoulders. Wagner understood immediately. "But you didn't." Chen nodded, pulling up the footage that clearly showed Sullivan's aggressive behavior, the suspiciously appearing evidence, and most damningly, Sullivan's racially charged comments. Wagner watched in growing horror, the reality of what was happening finally sinking in. "Dear God," he muttered. Outside the station, local journalist Samantha Rivera pulled up in her news van, responding to an anonymous tip about unusual activity. The 36-year-old reporter had investigated the department's racial issues for years, publishing several exposés that had been dismissed by previous administration as anti-police propaganda. As she set up her camera, she noticed a small crowd gathering, including several community members who had experienced harassment from Westlake officers. Among them stood Reverend Marcus Thompson, a 70-year-old civil rights veteran who had marched with Dr. Thompson with Dr. Sevent King decades earlier and now led the local Baptist church. Miss Rivera, the Reverend, called out, "I received calls from 3 different congregation members about a well-dressed black man being roughly arrested in the police station this morning. Do you know anything about this?" Rivera shook her head. "Not yet, Reverend, but something big is happening. The mayor's car just pulled up at the back entrance." Inside, Mayor Reynolds arrived like a storm front her heels, clicking purposefully across the linoleum as she headed straight for Wagner's office, brushing past officers attempting to brief her. "Where is he?" she demanded upon seeing Wagner. The interim chief gestured to the security monitor, showing the holding cell. "My God," Reynolds whispered, seeing her hand-picked reform candidate sitting calmly among other detainees. "How did this happen?" Wagner grimly played Chen's body camera footage. With each passing second, the mayor's expression shifted from shock to cold fury. "Get him out of there," now she ordered, "and prepare for a department-wide meeting in 30 minutes. This ends today." Detective Sullivan paced the narrow corridor outside the evidence room, checking his watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes, while Officer Jenkins, the evidence technician, processed the small bag of white powder allegedly found near Victor. How much longer? Sullivan demanded, his voice tight with growing anxiety. The initial satisfaction of putting the arrogant impersonator in his place was giving way to an uncomfortable suspicion that he might have miscalculated. Jenkins, a meticulous officer with thick glasses and thinning brown hair, glanced up from his work. "Mass spectrometer takes as long as it takes, detective." "Can't rush chemistry." Sullivan leaned closer. "But you can prioritize certain tests, can't you? This one's important." Jenkins continued his work without looking up. "They're all important to someone, detective." Sullivan exchanged glances with Conley, who stood guard at the corridor entrance. "We might have a situation," Sullivan muttered, stepping away from Jenkins and lowering his voice. "Wagner's asking questions, and I just saw the mayor arrive through the back entrance." Conley shifted his weight nervously. "Maybe we should check his story more thoroughly." Sullivan's expression hardened. "We can still control this. Go check our system access, see if you can verify his credentials properly." As Conley hurried away, Sullivan returned to his desk and attempted to access the FBI database to run a deeper background check on Victor Marshall, only to find an error message System temporarily unavailable due to scheduled maintenance. Please try again later. Sullivan slammed his fist on the desk, drawing stares from nearby officers. Convenient timing, he muttered. He picked up his phone and dialed a contact in the state police. Hey, Mike, it's Sullivan. Need a favor. Can you run a name through your system? Our access is down. After a brief pause, Sullivan's face fell. Your system's down too. Since when does that happen? Meanwhile, Officer Chen had found an unexpected ally in Sergeant Luis Rodriguez. The veteran officer had approached her in the break room after noticing her conversation with Wagner. Took guts to show that footage, he said quietly, pouring coffee that he didn't actually want. Chen tensed, preparing for recrimination, but Rodriguez surprised her. Sullivan's had a target on my back for years, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Written me up 3 times for procedural violations that white officers get away with daily. If what you're saying about this Marshall guy is true, I might have some information that could help. Chen's eyes widened. Like what, Rodriguez glanced around before responding. Documentation. Times, dates, incidents. I've been keeping records for years, hoping someone would eventually care enough to look at them. In the holding cell, Victor continued his methodical documentation of procedures and conditions, engaging other detainees in conversation that revealed patterns of discrimination. So they searched your car without consent, he asked Marcus Jones, who nodded emphatically. Said they smelled marijuana, but I don't even smoke. When they didn't find anything, suddenly they discovered a bag under the passenger seat that definitely wasn't mine. Victor nodded thoughtfully. And did they read you your rights before questioning you? Jones snorted. They didn't even tell me why I was being detained until after they had me in cuffs. The door to the holding area suddenly opened, and Interim Chief Wagner entered alone, dismissing the guard with a gesture. He approached Victor's cell, studying the man thoughtfully through the bars. Dr. Marshall, he asked, his voice low enough that other detainees couldn't hear. Victor met his gaze evenly, but said nothing, waiting for Wagner to continue. Wagner glanced at the security camera in the corner, then positioned himself to block its view. The mayor just arrived, he said quietly. She's extremely concerned about the situation. Victor raised an eyebrow, as she should be, Chief Wagner. I believe we were scheduled to meet under different circumstances this morning. Wagner studied him carefully. You're taking this remarkably well for a man falsely imprisoned. Victor leaned slightly closer to the bars. As the incoming chief, what message would it send if I lost my composure over a temporary inconvenience, especially when this incident so perfectly illustrates exactly why the mayor recruited me? He held Wagner's gaze. Tell me, Chief, how many Victor Marshalls without credentials and connections are sitting in cells across this city right now? The question hung in the air between them, and Wagner had the decency to look away first. What can I do? He asked finally. Victor's expression remained neutral. Nothing yet. Let the process play out exactly as it would for anyone else. The lesson will be more effective that way. Wagner nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. You planned this, didn't you? Coming in early out of uniform. Victor simply smiled. Outside the station, the crowd had grown to nearly 50 people as word spread through the community. Reverend Thompson organized the gathering into a peaceful demonstration, with supporters holding hastily made signs reading "Justice for All" and "End Police Discrimination." Community activist Jaleesa Washington, who ran the local youth center, directed volunteers to distribute water bottles as the morning sun intensified. This isn't just about one incident, she told Rivera during a brief interview. This is about years of harassment and profiling. People are tired of being treated like criminals in their own community. Inside, Mayor Reynolds strode purposefully toward the holding area, her patience exhausted after reviewing Chen's footage and hearing Wagner's report. Sullivan intercepted her in the hallway, positioning himself to block her path. Mayor Reynolds, with all due respect, were conducting an active investigation into a potential security threat. Reynolds fixed him with an icy stare. Detective Sullivan, the only threat I'm concerned about right now is the threat to this city's reputation and finances when Dr. Marshall files what will undoubtedly be the most justified lawsuit in municipal history. Sullivan blinked, momentarily thrown by her directness. Dr. Marshall, ma'am, we have reason to believe this individual is impersonating. Reynolds cut him off. Save it, detective. I personally recruited Dr. Victor Marshall from the FBI to serve as our new chief. I spoke with him last night to confirm his arrival time. The credentials you confiscated are absolutely authentic, as you would have discovered with one phone call to my office before making an arrest. Sullivan's face flushed red. Mayor, you don't understand. This suspect was behaving suspiciously and refused to properly identify himself. We followed standard procedure for. Standard procedure? Reynolds interrupted, her voice sharp enough to draw attention from nearby officers. Is it standard procedure to plant evidence? Detective Sullivan. Is it standard procedure to make racially charged comments to a detained suspect? Because Officer Chen's body camera captured some very non-standard behaviors that the city attorney is reviewing as we speak. Sullivan's expression shifted from defensive to alarmed. Body camera Chen was instructed to. He stopped himself, suddenly aware of the implications of completing that sentence. The mayor's eyes narrowed. Instructed to what, detective? Turn off a mandated accountability measure. That's very interesting. As this confrontation unfolded, Victor's wife Serena arrived at the station after trying unsuccessfully to reach her husband by phone. The elegant, composed surgeon approached the front desk, where Barbara, still Saturday, I'm trying to locate my husband, Dr. Victor Marshall. He had an appointment here this morning. Barbara gave Serena the same dismissive treatment she had given Victor. No appointments with any Marshall today, she said without checking. You must have the wrong department. Serena's patience, already thin from unanswered calls, evaporated. My husband is your new police chief, and if he's not answering his phone while meeting with you, something is wrong. Now I suggest you check again or find someone who will take me seriously. Barbara's eyes widened at the word chief, and she reached for her phone just as Mayor Reynolds rounded the corner with Wagner. Dr. Serena Marshall, the mayor, called out, recognizing her from the hiring process. I'm afraid we have a situation involving your husband. Serena turned alarm, crossing her features. What's happened? Is he all right? Reynolds grimaced. Physically, yes. But I'm afraid he's experiencing our department's problems firsthand. We're rectifying the situation immediately. As the mayor escorted Serena toward the holding area, Denise Washington approached with a thick file folder. Mayor Reynolds, I think you should see this, she said, her voice steady despite the obvious risk she was taking. I've been documenting incidents like this for years. Cases where procedures weren't followed, where evidence appeared mysteriously, particularly with minority suspects. Reynolds accepted the folder, her expression grim as she quickly scanned its contents. How long have you been collecting this? Denise straightened her shoulders. 15 years, ma'am. Nobody ever asked before. In the evidence room, Jenkins stared at his computer screen with a furrowed brow, just as Sullivan returned to check on the drug testing progress. That's strange, Jenkins muttered. Sample appears to be mostly baking powder with just trace amounts of cocaine. Not enough to register as a usable substance. Almost like someone created it to look like cocaine without actually being cocaine. He looked up at Sullivan. Where did you say you found this again? Sullivan's response was cut short by a notification that appeared on every computer in the department simultaneously. The FBI database had completed processing Victor's fingerprints, triggering an automatic alert, verified FBI credentials, contact supervisor immediately. Accompanying the alert was Victor's official FBI photograph and distinguished service record. Sullivan stared at the screen, the blood draining from his face, as he realized the magnitude of his error. Throughout the station, officers turned to look at him, their expressions ranging from shock to vindication. The charade was over. Mayor Reynolds stood at the entrance to the holding area, her arms crossed firmly over her chest as she confronted Sullivan and Conley. Release, Doctor. Marshall, immediately, she demanded, her voice, carrying enough authority to silence all other conversations in the vicinity. Sullivan, now visibly sweating, but still clinging to procedure as his shield gestured to the booking forms in his hand. Mayor, there's a process we need to follow. The charges have been formally entered into the system, and we need to. Reynolds cut him off with a sharp gesture. The charges that you fabricated, detective. the evidence that mysteriously appeared. Those processes Conley shifted uncomfortably, already distancing himself physically from his partner as he sensed the changing winds. Sullivan persisted, his desperation growing more evident. "Mayor, with all due respect, we can't just circumvent established protocols because the suspect turns out to be connected. That would undermine the entire justice system." The irony of Sullivan suddenly becoming concerned about proper justice was not lost on anyone present, least of all Victor, who remained composed in his cell, observing every interaction with the analytical precision that had made him a proper, renowned FBI behavioral specialist. Evidence technician Jenkins approached the growing confrontation, clearing his throat nervously. Detective Sullivan, about that substance found at the scene," he began, clutching his report. "The sample appears to have been contaminated. The test results are inconclusive and wouldn't hold up in court." His careful wording made it clear that he was providing Sullivan a professional courtesy rather than explicitly stating that the evidence had been planted. Sullivan shot Jenkins a look of betrayal, while Wagner seized the opportunity. "Well, that settles the drug charge. As for the trespassing and impersonation charges, I think we can all agree those were based on a misunderstanding." He turned to a nearby officer, "Release Dr. Marshall and return his personal effects immediately." The officer hurried to comply, clearly eager to distance himself from the unfolding disaster. Victor maintained his dignified silence as the cell was unlocked, using these final moments of his detention to observe how officers were reacting, mentally cataloging, who appeared troubled by the injustice and who seemed merely concerned about consequences. Each reaction told him something valuable about the culture he would need to transform. The mayor approached him as he was released. "Dr. Marshall, I cannot begin to express my apologies for this inexcusable situation." Victor straightened his suit jacket, which had been returned along with his other possessions. "No apologies necessary, Mayor Reynolds. This experience has been illuminating." His calm response clearly unnerved Sullivan more than any angry tirade would have. The detective's face flushed deeper red as he realized Victor had been gathering intelligence the entire time. As Victor collected his credentials and phone, the station transformed into a powder keg of tension. Officers who had ignored or enabled Sullivan's behavior for years now physically distanced themselves from him, while those who had suffered under his discrimination watched with barely concealed satisfaction. The tribal lines that had always existed beneath the surface were now starkly visible, providing Victor with a clear map of the department's internal dynamics. Reporter Samantha Rivera had managed to gain entry to the station's public area during the commotion, her cameraman capturing footage of the mayor's arrival and the subsequent activity. The presence of media created additional pressure as officers realized their actions would face public scrutiny. Inside the main conference room, Mayor Reynolds had assembled Sullivan, Conley, Wagner, and several senior officers. "Would someone like to explain how this happened?" she demanded. Sullivan, still defiant despite his crumbling position, stepped forward. "Mayor, we were following established department protocols for unidentified individuals in secure areas." Dr. Marshall refused to properly identify himself. Victor, who had been observing silently from the doorway, entered the room. "Is it protocol to use excessive force on cooperative subjects, Detective Sullivan?" he asked mildly. "Is it protocol to make assumptions about qualifications based on race? Is it protocol to plant evidence when you don't have legitimate charges?" Sullivan's composure finally cracked. "We maintain order in this department by being proactive. You want to know why Westlake's crime stats look good on paper? Because we don't wait for problems to develop. We identify potential troublemakers before they can act. And yes, sometimes that means making judgment calls based on patterns and experience." His outburst hung in the air, the implicit racism in his patterns and experience comment obvious to everyone present. Victor nodded thoughtfully. "And these patterns would include making assumptions about black men in professional attire who don't conform to your expectations." Sullivan realized too late that he had fallen into Victor's trap, essentially confessing to racial profiling in front of the mayor and multiple witnesses. He attempted to backtrack. "That's not what I meant." Officer Chen chose this crucial moment to step forward, connecting her body camera to the conference room display. "I think Dr. Marshall and the mayor should see exactly what happened," she said, her voice steady despite the career risk she was taking. The footage played clearly, showing Sullivan's aggressive approach that planted evidence, and most damningly his racially charged comments. The room fell silent, as Sullivan's true nature was exposed for all to see. Victor's wife, Serena, entered during the viewing, her expression shifting from concern to cold anger as she witnessed how her husband had been treated. When the mayor attempted to apologize again, Serena raised a hand to stop her. "Save it," she said firmly. "Just tell me what you're going to do about it." The mayor turned to Wagner. "Chief, effective immediately. Detectives Sullivan and Conley are suspended pending investigation." Wagner nodded, unable to meet Serena's gaze. Outside the conference room, Denise Washington was distributing copies of her documentation to the city attorney, her hands shaking slightly but her resolve firm. "These are similar incidents dating back 15 years, she explained. "Same patterns, same officers, same outcomes. The only difference today is that they picked the wrong target." Victor studied the files, noting the meticulous organization that reflected years of silent resistance from within the system. He turned to Denise with newfound respect. "You've been waiting for this day for a long time, haven't you?" Denise nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "Too long, sir." As word spread throughout the station, Victor's fingerprint identification had triggered alerts in the FBI database, leading to calls from his former colleagues, offering support and, if necessary, federal intervention. The situation had evolved from a local departmental issue to a potential federal civil rights investigation in the space of hours. Back in the main bullpen, Sullivan found himself increasingly isolated as former allies created distance to protect their own careers. He approached Victor during a momentary lull desperation, evident in his posture. "You set this up," he accused quietly. "You came in plain clothes without announcing yourself just to trap us." Victor studied him calmly. "Detective Sullivan, if simply being a well-dressed black man, asking questions in your police station was enough to trigger this level of misconduct, the trap was one you built yourself long before I arrived." The truth of this statement hit Sullivan like a physical blow, the realization dawning that his entire career might be unraveling because of deeply ingrained biases he had never questioned. "Do you believe what happened to Dr. Marshall was an isolated incident or a symptom of a deeper systemic problem in policing?" Comment number 1. If you think this represents a systemic issue that requires comprehensive reform, or number 2, if you believe this was just a few bad officers acting inappropriately. Like this video if you think more police departments need leaders like Dr. Marshall who are willing to confront bias head-on, and subscribe to follow this story as we explore how one man's journey transforms an entire system of justice. Now let's see how Dr. Marshall turns this disturbing incident into a powerful catalyst for change as the truth is finally revealed to the entire department. The main bullpen of Westlake Police Department had never been so silent, with officers, administrative staff, and civilian employees gathered in an impromptu assembly as Mayor Reynolds stood at the center of the room, her expression grave. Today has revealed fundamental problems in this department that can no longer be ignored or excused. She began her voice carrying to every corner of the suddenly cramped space. But before we address those issues, I want to properly introduce someone. She gestured to Victor, who stepped forward in his now somewhat disheveled suit, the small cut on his lip and the red marks on his wrists from the overly tight handcuffs still visible to everyone present. This is Dr. ATROM. Victor Marshall, former FBI Behavioral Science Unit Supervisor with 25 years of distinguished service recipient of the Director's Award for Excellence, and as of this morning your new Chief of Police. The collective intake of breath was audible as officers who had witnessed Victor's humiliation now realized the full magnitude of what had transpired. Sullivan and Conley, standing at the back of the room under the watchful eye of Wagner, visibly paled. Victor surveyed the room calmly, making eye contact with each person before speaking. "I had planned a different introduction today." He began, his deep voice measured and authoritative without being threatening. but I believe what happened this morning was far more valuable than any speech I could have prepared." He paused, allowing the tension to build. "In the span of 2 hours, I personally experienced racial profiling evidence, tampering, excessive force procedural violations, and a disturbing culture of silence that allowed it all to happen." Victor stepped forward, his presence commanding the room. "I saw officers who were willing to violate their oath to maintain what Detective Sullivan called order. I saw civilians like Miss Washington, who have been documenting abuses for years while being ignored. I saw brave officers like Chen who risked their careers to do the right thing. And I saw detainees like Mr. Jones who have suffered these indignities without the protection of a badge or influential connections." Sullivan pushed forward suddenly, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This is ridiculous. You deliberately misrepresented yourself to create this situation. You wanted to make us look bad." Several officers physically distanced themselves from Sullivan as he spoke, unwilling to be associated with his increasingly desperate defense. Victor remained unruffled. "Detective Sullivan I entered this building as a civilian, identified myself truthfully when asked, and presented legitimate credentials which you dismissed without verification. Every assumption you made about me was filtered through your own biases, and every procedural violation was your choice." He turned to address the entire room again. "This is not about making anyone look bad. This is about recognizing patterns that have damaged this department's relationship with the community and corrupted the administration of justice." Sullivan attempted another defense, gesturing wildly. "We maintain order by being proactive. You have no idea what it's like on these streets." Victor raised an eyebrow. "I grew up on these streets, Detective. The difference is that I didn't assume everyone who looked like you was a criminal." The subtle reversal landed heavily in the room, causing several officers to shift uncomfortably as they recognized the implicit bias in Sullivan's argument. Victor continued his tone, shifting from confrontational to constructive. "Starting today, this department will undergo comprehensive transformation. Not because I'm ordering it, but because what happened this morning has demonstrated why it's necessary." He held up Denise's file of documented incidents. "These patterns of misconduct didn't develop overnight, and they won't be solved with quick fixes or superficial diversity training. We need structural change, cultural change, and accountability at every level." Wagner stepped forward, visibly torn between departmental loyalty and the undeniable evidence of misconduct. "Dr. Marshall, while today's incident was unfortunate, I hope you won't judge the entire department by the actions of a few officers." Victor smiled slightly. "Chief Wagner, I don't judge the department by those who acted badly, but by those who watched and did nothing. The problem isn't just officers who profile and plant evidence. It's the culture that protects them afterwards." The truth of this statement hung heavily in the air as officers avoided each other's eyes, each mentally cataloging times they had witnessed misconduct and remained silent. The doors to the bullpen opened as community members were invited inside, including those who had been wrongfully detained alongside Victor. Marcus Jones entered momentarily hesitant until he saw Victor standing at the center of the room, now clearly in a position of authority. "Mr. Jones," Victor called out, "would you share with everyone what happened during your arrest yesterday?" Jones straightened, unaccustomed to being addressed with respect in this building. "I was waiting for the bus on Maple Street when 2 officers pulled up, said I matched a description. They searched me without consent, then claimed they found drugs in my pocket that definitely weren't mine. Been sitting in holding since yesterday afternoon." Victor nodded. "And how many times has something similar happened to you in Westlake?" Jones laughed without humor. "Lost count after the first dozen times. Been happening since I was 14. Victor turned to the assembled officers. "This stops today. Not because I'm imposing new rules, but because we're going to rebuild this department around the principle of equal justice, which is what your oath actually requires." He moved to a whiteboard and began writing his precise handwriting listing. Immediate changes, mandatory body cameras that cannot be deactivated during civilian interactions, civilian oversight committee with actual authority, transparent disciplinary procedures, community engagement requirements for all officers, evidence handling protocols with multiple witnesses. As he wrote, Victor continued speaking. Those who cannot or will not adapt to these changes are welcome to seek employment elsewhere. Those who remain will help build a department that earns the community's trust rather than demanding it. He turned back to face the room. Some of you are wondering if this means being soft on crime. It doesn't. It means being hard on injustice regardless of who commits it. The assembled officers and staff remained silent, the magnitude of the coming changes sinking in. Some looked relieved, others apprehensive, and a few openly hostile. Sullivan, seeing his influence rapidly evaporating, made one final desperate attempt. This is all a setup. He's coming in with an agenda to undermine real police work. Victor fixed Sullivan with a steady gaze. Detective, my agenda is justice. Nothing more, nothing less. If your definition of real police work conflicts with that, then you've identified the problem perfectly. Mayor Reynolds stepped forward again. Doctor, Marshall has my complete support in implementing these changes. Furthermore, the city will be conducting a comprehensive review of all arrests and convictions from the past 5 years to identify potential miscarriages of justice. This announcement sent a ripple of murmurs through the room as officers contemplated the implications. Victor raised his hand for silence. I want to be clear about something. I'm not here to punish officers who have served this community with integrity. I'm here to ensure that integrity becomes our universal standard, not just an individual choice. He gestured to Officer Chen. This morning, Officer Chen made a difficult choice to activate her body camera against direct orders. That kind of moral courage is what we need, and it will be recognized and rewarded under my leadership. Chen straightened, surprised by the public acknowledgement, as several officers nodded in support. Sullivan, seeing his support continuing to erode, made a show of removing his badge and dropping it on a nearby desk. If this is the direction the department is going, count me out. 20 years of service thrown away for political correctness. He looked around, clearly expecting others to join his protest. Instead, the room remained awkwardly silent, his theatrical gesture falling flat as former allies avoided his gaze. Victor observed this with a thoughtful expression before responding. Detective Sullivan, your badge represents a public trust, not personal power. If you see accountability as an impediment rather than essential to your work, then your decision to step away is the first positive change we've made today. The understated rebuke landed heavily in the silent room. As Sullivan stormed out, followed reluctantly by Conley, Victor addressed the remaining officers. Tomorrow morning we begin rebuilding this department. Tonight I want each of you to consider a simple question. Are you here to serve power or to serve justice? Because from now on, those two paths will no longer be the same in Westlake. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Detective James Sullivan's phone began lighting up with messages from his network of allies throughout the department and police union. After a sleepless night fueled by rage and whiskey, Sullivan had formulated what he considered a foolproof plan to undermine the new chief before Marshall could fully implement his reform agenda. "The union's behind us," announced William Harkins, the barrel-chested police union president, as he settled his considerable bulk into a booth at the Bluebird Diner 5 blocks from the station. Around him sat Sullivan and Conley and 4 other veteran officers who formed the old guard of the department. "We're filing official grievances claiming hostile work environment and targeting of officers based on seniority." Sullivan nodded approvingly, the bloodshot eyes and stubble revealing his rough night. "What about the work slowdown?" Harkins glanced around before lowering his voice. "Already in motion. Starting today, officers follow every procedure to the letter. Traffic stops that normally take 10 minutes will take 45. Response times to non-emergency calls will double. When citizens start complaining about decreased police presence, the pressure falls on Marshall and the mayor." Conley, looking considerably more nervous than his partner, leaned forward. "What about the evidence from yesterday? My body cam footage could be damaging if it gets out." Harkins waved dismissively. "Already handled. Technical malfunction corrupted the files. Same with yours, Sullivan." What none of them realized was that their counter-offensive had been anticipated long before Sullivan's arrest of Victor. Across town at the Westlake Police Department, Victor Marshall stood in the briefing room surrounded by a team of unfamiliar faces, all displaying federal credentials. As I suspected they're mobilizing the union and planning a work slowdown, Victor informed the assembled group. "Agent Rodriguez, your team has been embedded for how long?" A sharply dressed Latino man stepped forward. 3 weeks, Chief. We have documented 47 separate incidents of procedural violations, evidence mishandling, and discriminatory enforcement practices. Our officers have infiltrated all shifts and divisions. Victor nodded, unsurprised. And the technical malfunction affecting yesterday's body cameras, a young black woman with cybersecurity credentials smiled slightly. Already recovered and secured on external servers, along with complete backup copies of Miss Washington's documentation. Nothing has been lost. Victor turned to the whiteboard where Sullivan's network of influence was mapped out in detail. Phase 3 begins now. I want all surveillance resources focused on these 8 officers. They'll be making moves to undermine evidence and pressure witnesses from yesterday's incident. The door opened as Officer Chen entered, momentarily startled by the roomful of federal agents. Victor waved her in. "Officer Chen, meet the special task force that's been preparing for our departmental transition. Your actions yesterday accelerated our timeline, but ultimately helped us identify who we can trust moving forward." Chen looked around in amazement. "You had this planned all along." Even before the arrest, Victor's expression remained neutral. "Let's just say I did my homework before accepting this position. Westlake's problems didn't develop overnight, and solving them requires more than good intentions." Across town at City Hall, Mayor Reynolds faced an emergency session of the City Council where Council President Thomas Spencer was already attempting to capitalize on the previous day's chaos. This new chief has been on the job less than 24 hours. And has already created unprecedented division within our police department. Spencer declared, his jowls quivering with practiced indignation. "I move that we request his immediate resignation before further damage is done." Reynolds remained calm, having anticipated this resistance. Council President Spencer, before we vote on your motion, I believe you should be aware that Chief Marshall has provided me with some concerning documentation regarding your son's DUI incident last summer. Spencer's face reddened. "That case was dismissed due to lack of evidence." Reynolds nodded. "Yes, it was." Interestingly, the dashcam footage disappeared. The breathalyzer results were never logged, and the arresting officer was suddenly transferred to midnight shift at the airport substation. Chief Marshall's team has recovered all of that missing evidence as part of their review. Spencer fell silent as Reynolds continued. "Before anyone else calls for the chief's resignation, you should know that his team has been building a comprehensive map of preferential treatment evidence, tampering, and selective enforcement throughout our city. We can address these issues through reform, or we can address them through indictments. The choice is yours." The council chamber erupted in whispered conversations as members quickly calculated their positions. Outside, the police station reporter Samantha Rivera broadcast live as protesters gathered their numbers, swelling beyond what anyone had anticipated. What began as a shocking arrest of the incoming police chief has evolved into a larger conversation about policing in Westlake. Rivera reported the station visible behind her. Community members are calling this a tipping point after years of documented disparities in enforcement. Reverend Thompson stood nearby, addressing the crowd. "Yesterday they arrested the wrong man, but how many right men, right women, right children have suffered the same injustice without cameras or credentials to protect them?" The crowd responded with approving calls as more citizens arrived, many carrying signs with slogans like "Equal justice under law and reform now." Inside the station, Victor received an urgent call from his daughter Zoe. "Dad, someone posted our home address online." She reported, her voice tense but controlled. "Mom and I are getting threatening messages from people claiming to be police supporters." Victor's expression darkened for the first time since his arrest. "Are you somewhere safe?" When Zoe confirmed they had relocated to a hotel, Victor made a quick call to assign protection before addressing his command staff. "They're targeting my family now." This just became personal for them, which means they'll make mistakes. Officer Rodriguez nodded grimly. Classic intimidation tactic. Same playbook they use against witnesses in misconduct cases. Victor checked his watch. Sullivan should be making his move with the evidence within the hour. Make sure our people are in position. As predicted, Sullivan appeared at the station's back entrance 30 minutes later, using his still active keycard to access the evidence room. What he didn't realize was that his every move was being recorded by multiple cameras installed by Victor's team. As Sullivan attempted to access the evidence from yesterday's arrest, evidence technician Jenkins appeared in the doorway. "Can I help you, detective?" "Considering you're currently suspended, you shouldn't have access to this area." Sullivan froze, then attempted to bluff. "Just collecting personal items from my locker took a wrong turn." Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "Through 2 secured doors requiring separate key card access, that's quite a wrong turn." Sullivan brushed past him without responding, unaware that his attempted evidence tampering had been documented from multiple angles. By midday, Sullivan and his allies had escalated their counteroffensive, releasing selectively edited portions of body camera footage to sympathetic local media outlets attempting to portray Victor as the aggressor during his arrest. The edited clips showed only Victor's refusal to immediately identify himself, carefully omitting Sullivan's racial comments and the planted evidence. Victor, anticipating this move, held a press conference where he calmly presented the complete unedited footage alongside his medical examination, showing the wrist injuries from overly tight handcuffs and the split lip from rough place. Handling. "Transparency works both ways," Victor stated to the assembled media. "I'm releasing everything, not just convenient segments. The public deserves to see the full reality of what occurred." The contrast between Sullivan's selective editing and Victor's complete transparency shifted public opinion decisively, with social media overwhelmingly supporting the reform efforts. By late afternoon, Sullivan realized his counteroffensive was collapsing, as officers he had counted on for support began distancing themselves, unwilling to risk their careers, as the momentum clearly shifted toward Victor's reforms. In a final desperate move, Sullivan approached the mayor's office, directly requesting a private meeting to share concerns about Marshall's fitness for command. The mayor's assistant informed him that she was unavailable, but offered him a meeting with the city attorney instead. Sullivan declined, not realizing that his attempted end run around Victor had already been reported to the chief. As evening approached, Victor gathered his core team for an assessment. "Sullivan's network is fracturing faster than expected," Agent Rodriguez reported. "3 officers from his inner circle have already approached us about cooperation agreements, hoping to get ahead of potential charges." Victor nodded thoughtfully. "And the Union Harkins is backing down after learning about our evidence recovery. He's claiming the work slowdown was just a rumor and denying any official involvement." Victor smiled slightly for the first time that day. "So Phase 3 is nearly complete. The resistance identifies itself, overreaches, and collapses under scrutiny." He turned to Officer Chen. "How are the rank-and-file officers responding?" Chen straightened. "Better than expected, sir. Once they realize the reforms are about accountability rather than punishment, many expressed relief. Several have quietly mentioned misconduct they've witnessed, but felt powerless to address under the old leadership." Victor checked his watch. "Sullivan will make one more move before giving up. Probably tonight. Something personal rather than professional, now that his procedural attacks have failed." As if on cue, his phone rang. It was Serena. "Victor, someone just called the hotel. Asked for me by name. They knew which room we were in." Victor's expression hardened. "I'm sending additional security right now. Don't open the door for anyone." After ending the call, Victor turned to his team. "The line has been crossed. From this moment, we move from defense to offense. I want Sullivan and anyone associated with these threats in custody by morning. Use every legal tool at our disposal." The decisive shift in strategy energized the team as they dispersed to execute the final phase of Victor's plan. Sullivan, isolated and increasingly desperate, had unwittingly accelerated his own downfall by targeting Victor's family, transforming a professional reform effort into a personal mission for justice that would reshape Westlake forever. Exactly 1 month after his arrest, Chief Victor Marshall stood before a graduating class of new police recruits, their faces reflecting the diversity of Westlake itself. The department training center, once adorned with militaristic imagery, now displayed the department's new mission statement, Equal Justice, Community Trust, Professional Service. Victor surveyed the 28 fresh faces before him, noting the mix of excitement and solemnity as they prepared to receive their badges. "Today you become part of a department in transformation," he began, his deep voice carrying easily through the auditorium. "1 month ago I experienced firsthand what happens when badges become symbols of power rather than service. Your generation of officers will define what those badges mean for decades to come." In the front row sat the families of the graduates, including Marcus Jones, the young man who had been detained alongside Victor and who now, with his record cleared, had been hired as a community liaison officer. Behind them, Mayor Reynolds and the full city council watched approvingly, their initial political divisions largely healed by the undeniable success of Victor's reforms. The changes had come swiftly after Sullivan's final desperate actions had backfired. The detective now faced multiple criminal charges for evidence tampering and civil rights violations, with trial set for next month. His partner Conley had accepted a plea deal in exchange for testimony about years of systematic misconduct. Most significantly, Sullivan's threatening actions toward Victor's family had broken the blue wall of silence, with several officers coming forward to report similar intimidation tactics used against civilian complainants in the past. Officer Chen, now Sergeant Chen, headed the newly established Internal Affairs Division with a mandate for genuine accountability rather than the protection of officers at all costs. Her first official act had been to create anonymous reporting channels for officers to safely report misconduct, resulting in a flood of historical information that helped identify patterns of abuse. The mayor's approval ratings had soared to 78%, confounding critics who had predicted chaos and rising crime rates following the reforms. Instead, serious crime remained stable, while citizen complaints dropped by 34% in just the first month. Victor had implemented his planned changes methodically: body cameras that uploaded footage automatically to secure servers and could not be deactivated during civilian interactions, community oversight panels with actual disciplinary authority, transparent complaint procedures accessible in multiple languages, and most controversially, a complete restructuring of patrol assignments to ensure officers regularly served all neighborhoods, regardless of demographics. After the graduation ceremony, Victor returned to his office, where the holding cell that had once contained him had been redesigned as a reflection space with information about historical civil rights struggles and the evolution of policing prominently displayed. As he reviewed personnel files, a knock at his door revealed Officer Rodriguez. "Chief, we've completed the preliminary review of the Henderson case. It appears to be another wrongful arrest with Sullivan's fingerprints all over it." Victor nodded, adding the file to a growing stack of cases being reconsidered under his initiative to address past injustices. "Make sure Mr. Henderson knows we're reviewing his case. And check if he needs any support services in the meantime." Rodriguez nodded. "Already done, sir." That evening, the community center hosted a town hall meeting where Victor and his command staff answered questions directly from citizens, a monthly practice he had instituted to rebuild trust. Former detainee Marcus Jones shared his story publicly for the first time, describing how his wrongful arrest record had prevented him from securing employment until Victor's intervention. "Chief Marshall didn't just change policies," Jones told the gathered crowd. "He changed lives. Mine is just one example." In the audience, Serena Marshall sat with their daughter Zoe, who had started a student advocacy group at her college focusing on criminal justice reform. The family had fully relocated to Westlake, with Serena establishing a community counseling program for victims of police misconduct, creating a healing space that addressed the psychological trauma often overlooked in reform efforts. After the meeting, Victor drove to the outskirts of town, where the Westlake Cemetery lay quiet under a canopy of oak trees. He walked to a simple headstone marked Michael Marshall, beloved brother, 19752010. Victor knelt, placing his police chief's badge briefly against the cool stone. "We did it, Mike," he whispered. "It's just the beginning, but we did it." The promise he had made at his brother's funeral 15 years earlier, to create change from within the system that had failed Michael, now felt tangibly fulfilled. Later that night, long after most staff had departed, Victor sat in his office, reviewing officer files, identifying potential leaders who could carry the reform efforts forward. Officer Rodriguez knocked and entered, looking troubled. "Chief, we've received reports of similar discriminatory practices in Riverdale, the neighboring jurisdiction. Several citizens have come forward after hearing about our reforms." Victor turned to a large map of the state pinned to his wall, where Westlake was now marked with a green pin indicating reform in progress. He placed a red pin on Riverdale. "This was always bigger than just one department, Rodriguez." He stood surveying the map thoughtfully. "This is just the beginning." As Victor contemplated the challenges ahead, he reflected on how a single day of injustice had catalyzed a movement that would ultimately transform not just Westlake, but potentially policing practices throughout the region. The system that had once handcuffed him was now itself being reformed, proof that accountability could create justice when applied with unwavering determination. The badge that Sullivan had tried to deny him had become a symbol not of power over others, but of the power to create meaningful change. What changes do you think are most needed in policing today? Comment below with your thoughts on how departments can better serve all community members with equal justice. If Dr. Marshall's journey from handcuffs to creating lasting change inspired you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about justice prevailing against systemic challenges. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how transformative leadership can turn even the most painful experiences into catalysts for positive change. Thank you for watching this powerful story of accountability and reform, and remember that true justice requires both courage and compassion, qualities that we can all cultivate in our own lives. Dr. Marshall's journey from handcuffed suspect to transformative leader reveals profound truths about systemic change. His deliberate choice to experience discrimination firsthand, entering as a civilian without announcing his position, exposed biases that might have remained hidden behind polite facades and procedural justifications. This story demonstrates that meaningful reform often requires leaders willing to personally witness injustice rather than simply reading reports or statistics. The transformation of Westlake Police Department teaches us that accountability isn't punishment, it's the foundation of justice. When Sullivan's misconduct was exposed, the system didn't just punish one bad apple but addressed the culture that enabled him. Victor understood that lasting change requires structural reform, policy changes, and cultural transformation working in concert. Perhaps most importantly, this story shows how power responds when challenged. Sullivan's escalating counterattacks, from procedural obstruction to personal threats, reveal how entrenched systems fight to preserve themselves. Yet Victor's strategic preparation and unwavering resolve demonstrate that even deeply rooted problems can be overcome with careful planning and moral courage. The ripple effects beyond Westlake remind us that justice work is never finished. Victor's expanding map of departments needing reform illustrates that transformation isn't a destination, but an ongoing process requiring constant vigilance and commitment to equal justice for all. What experiences in your community have shaped your views on policing and justice? Have you witnessed moments where accountability created positive change, or where its absence allowed problems to persist? Share your thoughts in the comments. Below, your perspective matters in this crucial conversation. If Dr. Marshall's strategic approach to reform resonated with you, hit that like button to help this story reach others who believe in the power of transformative leadership. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives about individuals who turn adversity into opportunity and injustice into meaningful change. This story matters beyond our platform, Share it with someone who needs to understand how systems can be reformed from within when courageous leaders are willing to experience the very injustices they seek to address. Your share could inspire another changemaker in your community. Thank you for joining us for this powerful journey from handcuffs to healing. Remember that true justice requires both unflinching honesty about problems and unwavering hope for better systems. Until next time, keep believing in the possibility of positive change even in the most resistant institutions.